from the streets of New York City, Porkins Policy Radio. Here's Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond. You can hear this show live every Tuesday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern by tuning into Ocelli.com. Of course, you can also find all of the shows archived on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, find everything archived on my website. You can follow the RSS feed directly over there as well. You can also follow me on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Player FM, Podbean. Pretty much all minor and major podcatchers will have the feed. I'm also on YouTube, so if that is your preferred method of listening to podcasts, you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you do use YouTube, maybe less so with YouTube because it is still a bit of a cesspool when it comes to the comments. But if you do like the video, definitely give it a thumbs up. If you use iTunes, give us a good rating. If you like the show, give us a 5-star rating. Maybe even write a little review. That helps a lot. It's very it's good for numbers and for getting people interested in the show. And if you like what you hear, if you'd like to support my work, then you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. And for as little as $1 a month, you can support me. And that single solitary dollar gives you access to the exclusive monthly bonus podcast. And quickly, because I had done I was on Ed Opperman's show a couple weeks ago. And because I mentioned sometimes, that I'm also carried, or the stream is also, the show is picked up on Ed Opperman's Spreaker channel. But if that is how you listen to the show, you may not have heard some recent episodes because I've been forgetting to send Ed my show. So I will try and do that. It's also, of course, on Chuck Ocelli's Spreaker channel, and my show is also played on a host of other networks. On Friday nights, I think Awake Radio, People's Internet Radio, a couple other stations pick it up. But as I clear my throat, which you should never do live on the radio, but here I am doing it. As I clear my throat, I want to welcome back a very good friend of the show, someone that really needs no introduction, someone that's been on the show many times before, and that is our good friend Jon Atack. Of course, the writer behind Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky and other books as well. I'm sure we will be discussing some of those on today's show. Jon, it's been a while. I'm glad to have you back on.
Yeah, it's good to hear from you, Pierce. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And also joining us on the line, I'm very excited to have him on the show, is Sam Atack, who will be new, I think, to many of the listeners, although hopefully people will be familiar with Sam from the new video series that the two of you are doing. But Sam Atack, it is good to have you on the show as well. Welcome.
Good to be here. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe now.
Yes, absolutely.
And you will, of course, experience everlasting damnation if you don't. We don't want to worry you in any way. But this is the Sam of the Unification Church of Saminanity. It's not just any old Sam. So be careful out there.
And I guess I do want to I'm glad you brought up the Unification Church of Saminanity because I want to get into that. Quickly, though.
Just send us a piece of blank paper with your name signed on it, and you will be a member.
Before we jump in, like I said, the listeners are very familiar with you, Jon. But Sam, do you want to just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Who is Sam Atack?
Yeah. Who is Sam Atack? Well, my hobbies include origami, that sort of thing. But I started the Unification Church, 2 years?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
When you were 14, yeah.
Yeah. It was a sort of prank type thing. My friends, who are also the founders, but we won't name them because the only true hero is Sam. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it was sort of like Oh no, a dare with myself to see how many people you could trick into a stupid ideology.
Without using any techniques or traps at all. And the amazing thing is that, he spent all of these years around me learning about cults and how you get people into cults, and he just went out and thought, I'll start my own.
Yeah, I could do that.
And I've been telling him all this stuff about, all of these, tactics of influence and how you get people to do things. And he just went up to people and said, do you want to join my cult? And 50 people joined. So, I'm giving up. I don't know anything about this stuff. He's much better at it than I am.
Well, some people I had to ask twice.
Oh.
You sort of, you get their friends and then you go back to them. Do you want to join, or I'll make all your friends shun you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So nothing manipulative.
No, good threat.
And what was the, I know in the, one of the, there's a new, or several new video series that you, Jon and Sam are doing. You can find that it's on your YouTube channel, which is called Opening Minds. We'll link up to the YouTube channel, and we will also link up to some of the videos that we're going to be discussing. But you have a whole video kind of, introducing the Unification Church of Saminanity. I guess just, let's just kind of pick that apart a little bit more, because it's interesting. Just the fact that you actually got 50 people to kind of join. And again, of course, I'm sure a lot of these were your friends, Sam, but
not for long.
Right, yeah. And
majority were people I didn't know. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Imperfect strangers, as we call them.
That's good. I guess just first and foremost, what made you think? I know you're saying it was sort of like as a prank to see, but how much time did you spend thinking about it? And also, you list many of the rules. Are there really, 173 rules? Did you really write them all down, Sam?
No, that's a horrific exaggeration, Pierce.
There are only 71.
Yeah.
It was only 71? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Well, but when you actually look at the list, there are 119, but that's explained much later on.
Yeah, I did spend quite a bit of time on it. I had the rules, and then I sort of had a genesis, an origin story, and then I said...
What was your origin story? I don't think I've heard that.
It sums down to an accidental sausage spillage, but we won't get into that.
We better not. No, that sounds as if it might be unpleasant in some way. So that's the beginning.
Other things I wrote down a ton of ways you could do humiliating things and the levels and what superpowers you'd gain through that, like being able to run as fast as a snail.
It's kind of inspired by a kind of peculiar mix, if you can imagine this, of Ron Hubbard and Eric Cartman.
I did enjoy the numerous South Park references throughout, and also to I love when you were talking, Sam, about leveling up, and I like that as sort of a phrase. And I'm someone that is I've played. I was just talking with Chuck before we aired about how much I'm into this new video game that I'm playing at the moment, and I've played a lot of board games and stuff. So the leveling up thing, it seemed to fit so much with what you were talking about, and I certainly liked it. But I also enjoyed the South Park references and some of the the sort of blatant there's some ones about being abusive to other people and the sort of the importance of yourself as the cult leader. It's interesting, and again that you had 50 people that signed up to sort of to join.
A blank piece of paper.
Two of which were teachers in my school.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'd just like to get back to the point that we're also big fans of J.P. Sears and his ultra spirituality.
So good, yeah.
Yeah, and so intolerance, I think he's really brought that to a new level. And,
yes, yeah.
We're working on being offensive and intolerant. Because being nice to people just hasn't worked. Let's be honest about it, But the people who seem to be successful in this world, and you can list any dozen of your favourite politicians.
Alan Sugar.
Or Alan Sugar. Yeah, there you go. Who's not actually a politician.
No,
you just get him on the list of top politicians.
Well, in my school, he was given as an example for what you strive for, this total narcissistic.
Send all your business to Indonesia and have slaves there, mate. But you look at the world leaders at the moment, and And how did they get to these positions of power? And we believe it's through the gospel of intolerance and inhumanity. So, I've come to a midpoint in life at the age of 64 where I've just been doing it wrong all these years, basically, all this rubbish about compassion. We need to look at this a different way, I think, which is why we've released the series Think Like a Cult Leader, which is based on another book which has the words think like a in the title, which will let you guess. But I think was it a champion? I think it's Think Like a Champion. Yeah. I was very disappointed. I got my copy of Think Like a Champion. I thought I'm going to get a great Donald Trump book. And it's only 3 inches by 2 inches. It's tiny. He does say, and one of the things that people don't realise about Donald Trump, and I didn't realise this, is how humble he is.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
I'm
Donald
more
Trump,
humble than I seem.
He's not only a very stable genius who believes in the beauty of coal, which I've yet to see, beautiful, clean coal, but he's also a very humble person, and I think it's wrong of us not to appreciate that about him, don't you, Pierce?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm telling that to people around me all the time.
See how humble he is. It's incredible.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's great. He's humble. He's
we've got Modi, we've got Abe, we've got Netanyahu, we've got Bolsonaro, we've got Duterte, we've got just go through Putin, President Xi. These people didn't get there by being nice, did they? They didn't get there by being friendly and compassionate and helping old ladies cross the road. They got there by pushing old ladies under buses, basically. So if you're an old lady and you're listening to this, it's nothing personal. We just want your money.
I went through because there's 14 parts to Think Like a Cult Leader, and they're short too.
Very short.
And they're funny. You can watch them all in a
What do you mean
in a quick sitting.
How dare you say they're funny?
I'm just trying to be humble.
We're perfectly serious.
What's striking to me is how applicable so many of the things you're talking about are to just sort of everyday life. And I'm sure that should be sort of like par for the course. People that have been, listening to this show and certainly the conversations that we've had over the years, Jon, yes, of course, these sort of tactics are utilized. But I don't know, there was something that really kind of struck me, and here I am sort of breaking one of my own rules. I promise to stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein on this program, but I'm already sort of breaking that, and because listening to you and Sam,
dead, okay?
I know.
Put it down, let it go.
I can't. I know. I'm the worst. I've done this every subsequent show since my quote unquote last show on Epstein for a while. I've somehow managed to bring him up, but the thing that struck me listening to you and Sam talk about the how to think like a cult leader is how many like kind of similarities I saw with at least the sort of limited look into who Epstein was and how he operated. And I think that it kind of also in a lot of ways it kind of like demystifies a lot about Epstein in particular, but in the sort of in general the sort of people that employ a lot of these tactics. And I think that's really useful. I kind of see this as you kind of can like think like a cult leader. It's easy. Like, you sort of like present it as a sort of like step-by-step process, how to learn how to do this. And it kind of reminded me of Carrie Burt's short film, Mind Control Made Easy, or How to Become a Cult Leader.
Yeah.
It had a lot of that sort of a feel. But, yeah, I was just surprised at how many things in what you guys were talking about were, to me at least, seemed to just sort of like tick so many boxes with Jeffrey Epstein. A big one for me, and we can kind of explore this because I liked when you guys focused on it, is this idea of like how impulsive a cult leader has to be, and how cult leaders are kind of like almost bored, or they get bored very easily. And maybe you can kind of elaborate on that, because I see with just as an example with Epstein, he seems to be so he's interested in everything. And at the end of the day, it's like, it really seems like there's one thing that truly interested him, and that was abusing children. But this impulsive nature of cult leaders and their ability to get bored easily. It seems like that was like, as another example, Hubbard seemed to get bored endlessly, right, Jon?
Yeah, and I mean, I promised I'd stop talking about Hubbard in about 1986. So don't worry about your Epstein problem. It is one of the amazing things with Hubbard. I talked with so many. Well, I talked with so many people about him, and one of them was a guy called Richard DeMille, who was the son of Cecil B. DeMille, adopted son, but actually a blood nephew. So he grew up in the house of the biggest of the movie moguls of the time, really, Cecil B. And then gets in with Hubbard and spends, they have 3 months where they're just the two of them together, because Hubbard has, and don't laugh, he's kidnapped his own 1-year-old daughter from the mother and run away to Cuba, because the mother has said nasty things about him, like that he ruptured her eustachian tube and made her deaf in one ear during one of the many beatings he gave her. She said these nasty things publicly in a divorce court. So being the most entirely rational human being in all of history, the future Buddha, Maitreya, who would lead us all to enlightenment, he kidnapped their daughter and ran away to Cuba for 3 months. And Richard DeMille lived with him there during that time, looking after the baby and looking after Ron, who at the time was drinking a bottle of rum a day, according to Richard DeMille. That was on top of the amphetamines and barbiturates, by the way. But
cigarettes.
Oh, and 100 cigarettes a day. Cult leaders are different, though. They live at a different speed. But what I found out was that Hubbard's second book, Science of Survival, published in 1951, was actually compiled by Richard DeMille. He then compiled the next 2 books. Then Hubbard got a guy called Althea Hart to compile the next book. And then a guy called John Sanborn from 1954 to 1978. Every Hubbard book, even when you got to the novels at the end, Mission Earth, they were compiled, brought together by Robert Vaughan Young. And the reason for this is that Hubbard's attention span, his tedium, his sense of boredom was so intense that he couldn't reread anything he'd written. So he didn't redraft anything. And it got to the point where he didn't draft anything. He wrote, he had hypergraphia. There's no argument about that. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific author of all time. Now, I'm sure his people have kind of trebled the amount to get him in there, because the same things were published repeatedly. But nonetheless, he had hypergraphia. He could not help but write. He had to keep putting these things down. But he couldn't read anything that he'd written because it bored him. He was... So this, and then you look to Robert Hare talking about psychopaths in general, and you find this impulsivity, the risk-taking that, I need to get a thrill. I thought for a while this must mean that psychopaths are low in dopamine. They're the reward chemical. But the opposite is true. They overproduce dopamine, and it's not enough. So they escalate their behaviors accordingly to find out something that will give them a laugh. And usually... What gives them pleasure is hurting other people or making other people do ridiculous things. Hubbard had 2 people push a peanut around the deck of the wooden deck of his ship at one point with their noses. So finding, things that will humiliate people. But this is terrible. I'm starting now to explain this to you, and I'm trying to think like a cult leader now, so I shouldn't be letting these secrets loose. It is terrible. What do you think, Sam?
In terms of the punishment, my favourite one is Bhagwan, Minasti, as he says.
Minasti, sorry, Namasti.
Namaste.
We get that one confused.
Where he gets his friend to walk across a tightrope.
Yeah, he's a child, and he had a friend walk across a tightrope, according to his Hugh Milne, his former bodyguard, who went to India and researched his life. And he said that this kid had been talked into crossing this tightrope, and he fell to his death. And that's the kind of prank that these, people who just don't care about other people. I saw an interview with Lance Armstrong, the cyclist, and he's amazing in interview because he is an utter and total narcissist.
Yes.
Okay, why didn't anybody notice? This guy was a creep. But then you think about Nixon or one or two other people in history who have achieved positions of power. Some of them with moustaches, some without.
Best ones have moustaches.
No, Mao is actually the biggest of all of them. 70 million people, Jung Chang reckons Mao killed. 70 million. So who's the champion now? Who is the greatest cult leader of them all? It's Mao Zedong. Stalin, the people with moustaches, they're nothing in comparison. But yeah, there are certain characteristics that and I've come to, I've been banging on about this stuff now for decades, as you know, and barely anybody's listening because they don't get what you said at the beginning, which is this is everyday life. Everybody knows, 2% of people, 3% of men, 1% of women are psychopaths, according to Robert Hare. You've also got things like the narcissistic disorders and the borderline disorder and all sorts of tiny little technical things. My favourite is the Machiavellian personality disorder, which sadly didn't make it to the last edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. What a shame that Niccolo Machiavelli is not better remembered in our society, having given such good advice. He wrote 2 books. He wrote The Prince, which everybody reads, which is to Cesare Borgia, who was a bit unpleasant. But he also wrote a book called The Discourses at the same time to the Florentine Council, which gives very similar advice, but what you'd do if you were kind of a bit more of slightly more democratic and not as evil as Cesare. So he was a man of many talents, Machiavelli.
Equal opportunity.
Equal opportunity dictatorship. I don't know.
Well, no, but again, kind of just to hone in on that, and that's why, forgive me, listeners, but with the, again, the comparison of, the comparison of Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, I think it's easy to view him as this almost like omnipotent force, that's doing, and he's got his finger in all sorts of different pies, and he's working for 4 different intelligence agencies, and he's doing this, and he's this money manager, and yes, I think that to an extent that is all true, but we need to kind of demystify some of these. We turn these people into these like godlike figures, and I think that kind of feeds into their own ability to have influence over other people. And you can even look at, again, our own political, problems here in the U.S. with Donald Trump. I mean,
you have problems with him?
I woke up this morning, John, Amy, and I were just sort of learning about Black Rod in the UK, and
so the Queen is allowed to go into Parliament.
Right.
Black Rod has to bang on the door first. Don't you do that in your house? If Amy wants to bathroom,
No, I mean we are big fans of Black Rod and certainly of
sounds like a superhero, doesn't he?
Yeah, and she sort of looked like one too. I mean, she looked like a video game character, sort of like come to life.
Yeah.
But same thing like Boris Johnson.
Most of our Parliament are video cameras.
Yeah. The same with like a Boris Johnson type figure. I mean, he seems to have, I think he certainly ticks many of the boxes that you and Sam talk about in your video series. And again, we kind of need to like demystify some of that. But Sam, I'd like to throw a question more to you. Again, kind of back to this sort of again when the two of you were talking about impulsive behavior and things, you're also talking about cult leaders are so bored, and one of the things you remarked on is how society in general seems to kind of be fitting in that mold of extreme boredom. And John, you sort of like hypothesize, maybe that means that one day in 10 years everyone will sort of have their own cult, but no one will join cults because they'll all be so bored. But I'd like to throw it more to you, Sam. I mean, how do you see that happening more and more? Like in youth culture, and how do you think like boredom plays into this?
Definitely, it's become a much more individualistic society. I mean, an example of something I saw among my youth groups is them gathering together around a road, and they'd do things like try and run in front of the road with their eyes closed.
Run across the road.
Yeah, run across the road, basically, yeah. But
thrill-seeking and risk-taking.
That's right, thrill-seeking, risk-taking.
Especially at the point in your teens where, of course, your brain is melting and reformulating.
And especially if you think doing so will get you in with the popular kids. The head tells you to do something stupid.
And that's something that's really culturally dictated, isn't it? I mentioned Robert Vaughan Young, who rewrote Mission Earth for L. Ron Hubbard. He said Hubbard had left a character in there called Tight Pussy, which he thought was not really a good proper name for a Native American, but he took that out. But I can't remember what I was going to say about him. What was I going to say about Vaughan? He got annoyed with me because he said, when you're talking about the pranking and the kind of things that people do to each other, you don't include hazing in that, do you? Because he thought hazing was a really good idea. Now, we don't really have that over here. So to us, it's completely insane. But when it's part of your culture, of course, it's a proud tradition, rather like Black Rod, being got up in sort of 17th century costume.
Yeah, like in Cialdini, talking about kids who'd been hazed into... A kid who'd been hazed into eating a raw piece of meat whole and ended up choking.
Oh, there are deaths.
All sorts of stupid things.
It's, a certain amount of lemurs will fall from the trees. It's part of evolution. So if, a few people are traumatized beyond belief in hazing, but something will become cultural. That's what I'm saying, that there are ways of punishing, humiliating and harming people. Probably at every place in the world, when kids leave school and get their first job, then they'll be asked to go and get some sky hooks from the stores or, something of this kind. It's one thing to have a kind of gentle humour, but things can get quite nasty, and you start getting a culture, or you can start getting a culture where the Boy Scouts become the Hitler Youth. And what is acceptable to do to other people, to have a laugh, actually does become highly destructive towards some individuals in the society. And I think that kind of, we have a tendency towards creating psychopathic societies. Do you know about the Yamnaya, Pierce?
I do not.
Yeah, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, this bunch of people called the Yamnaya came down through Europe. And the records now show, DNA records show, irrefutably, in as much as anything is irrefutable, that they killed every man and every male child they found. And they went all through Western Europe, right over through Britain. So the people who built Stonehenge, the whole male line of those people was destroyed by the Yamnaya. They took over the corded ware people and started making quite a nice pottery with cord, so they weren't totally evil. If you're a tourist looking for some pottery and you're a woman, then you might be all right. But this thought, what really hit me was the idea that our whole culture, it's very much what chimpanzees and bonobos will do, particularly chimpanzees, if they find another set of chimps, another pack, they'll kill the males and they'll take the females. And so I'm not much for modularism in evolution, or the idea that we've got to behave in a certain way because 3 million years ago, our great-great-grandmother was upset by an ant's nest or something. And so we created a module in our brains that makes us believe in God, or, whatever the argument is. I'm not too much for that. But the thought that a group of people, it was the thing that got me as a kid. How could the Germans have voted, in 1938, when Austria's Anschlussed itself into Germany, they have a vote. And if I remember rightly, 98% of people vote to not have the right to vote anymore. How? And that's this incredible cultural thing, this incredible power. So that if we're not aware of, it's not proper to behave in certain ways. Grabbing women by the pussy, for example, is not acceptable in my society. But there are societies where it is very acceptable, and we're seeing, I think, I hope we're seeing a fantastic positive change in society where racial discrimination, gender discrimination, things of these type are finally, we're finally doing something about it in some parts of the world. But there is so much further to go. And a lot of that is to do with explaining everything shifted for me, Piers. When we first started talking, I was part of the Open Minds Foundation. I'm on sabbatical from the Open Minds Foundation at the moment because it's looking at serious educational projects and all of this kind of thing. And I'm just going, no, after all these years, I've just got to somehow get straight to the audience. I've got to get straight to youngsters, people 11 and upwards, and say, look, this really isn't complicated. If you get caught up in an abusive, authoritarian, toxic relationship, whether with an individual or a group, a cult group or what have you, then you will spend probably 10 or 50 years recovering from the experience if you manage to escape. But if you see these simple little pointers about who not to get involved with, you won't get involved with them. And, I don't know how many people we can reach. I don't know how many people have got enough of a sense of humour to waste their time listening to us. But if you can change the society at all, that would be an amazing change. If less people got into, toxic relationships, bad marriages, because the dynamics of the cult leader, of the authoritarian personality, are, or the human predator, as you also call them, are pretty much the same. There's a spectrum. There are degrees of it. At the worst end, you've got, Mao Zedong. We've already, we're really bigging up Mao Zedong. You're trying to get over over Epstein, that you go from that right down to somebody who's been in a coercive relationship, and every stage in between, pseudo-religious cults, commercial cults. But I get it in the business world. I get it in the political world, this kind of overriding people's say, taking rights away from people, forcing them to comply with, criminal and unpleasant activities. It's all around us in a society that is narcissistically driven. The idea is, look at me, I'm fantastic, aren't I beautiful? I'm still 18 years old, I'm fantastic. This ridiculous society that wants everybody to be an adolescent, that doesn't accept, that we should be thinking for ourselves, and has created a whole educational system that is brilliant at stopping people from thinking. You're only meant to start thinking when you get to the doctoral level, pretty much in our system. And by that time, there's nothing left. It's like Matthew Lipman said that he gave up his job as a philosophy professor at Columbia because by the time they got to him, it was too late. At the age of 18, it was too late because the school had done such a job.
Do you see that? Just I'm sort of like. Me personally, I'd kind of taken a break from, exploring, like over the summer, just exploring a lot of these topics, and because it can become overwhelming, obviously. And I'd sort of
become overwhelming many years ago,
right? And I'd sort of like taken a break and working on different things and trying to enjoy myself and whatnot. And now that I'm sort of like back. In it, so to speak, right? I'm doing the radio show, back to doing it every week, and I'm working on different projects. Obviously, we've got this upcoming presidential election to look forward to here that, just sort of fills the screens endlessly. And I mean, just to the both of you, do you see this as sort of like getting worse? Or, are we just sort of like, kind of beating a dead horse, Jon? I mean, I know, people are probably have heard us talk about this before, but, I hate to say it, but again, the situation seems dire. And again, back to that, this issue of like, I don't know, like boredom and also like selfishness. And Sam, maybe you could speak more to this, like in youth culture, but people, it seems so self-centered, to the extent of really not caring about like anything, And just as I use like one of my own personal examples. We're a little concerned here about water and what's in our water, and we're looking at all different types of filters and
water, folks. Stop drinking anything.
Yeah,
yeah, basically, right?
Monoxide. Yeah.
And we're looking at different water filters and stuff, and inevitably, I'm looking at this one that Aaron Brockovich, the real Aaron Brockovich, is sponsoring. But the craziest thing is that the entire filter is made of plastic. and it seems like Aaron Brockovich has this whole thing about the water, it's so horrible, and I agree with her. It's all these chemicals in there, things leaching into that whatnot. But she's still.
If it's Teflon, then your animals are all going to die.
Yeah, like she's marketing a thing that's made of plastic, and it seems like with that, and maybe I'm making too much of this, but it's like the message I got from that was like, oh well, yeah, it is important that we drink clean water, but I'm not really going to think all that far into the future of like the next generation of people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, buy a plastic filter that's going to obviously just get leached back into the water. And I don't know. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, it does seem like we are becoming more and more self-centered, and I think that even though we are selfish and stuff, then you do get these authoritarian leaders that pop up, whether in mainstream or kind of extreme politics, that kind of people latch onto them. And I'll throw that to you guys, just to pick apart.
Well, I mean, it's not true, is it? No, everything's fantastic now, actually, yeah. Pierce.
Yeah.
It's just your perception. I think, as Sam can point out, the world ended in 2012. So you got to pick up on that.
Actually, I'd like to pick up on something else. Something you mentioned in there.
Well, I'd like to pick on the thing that you were picking on.
Where I think you can get information over to people my age. I think we've seen it with YouTube channels such as Khan Academy.
I've not managed to teach you anything, have I?
Yeah, true, but I'm an idiot.
Sorry, Pierce.
Sorry. So, Khan Academy, seeing that come in and having my friends talk to me about them educating themselves in a certain topic.
Well, Khan Academy's got, 5 million subscribers.
5 million.
Crash Course has got 9 million. And it's as if the next generation has said, we don't believe you or trust you anymore.
And Greta Thunberg.
Greta Thunberg swimming across the Atlantic.
That's right.
To make sure that she wouldn't be able to go to the toilet properly for 2 weeks. Sorry. They just one of the things they went on about that boat that you had to, in a bucket. I mean.
Well, the media there really seems to have picked on her. I mean, again, talking about like. That selfishness. It's like, well, this girl's just trying to do something, but you've got to kind of cut her down, right? And make fun of her and humiliate her. I mean, it seems
as much as
possible.
She'll
just be silent again.
She's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant, because doesn't it exemplify the time we're in? This very soft-spoken, humble, and intelligent young girl decides she's going to picket her own school. Because the environment's being destroyed, and it's about time we did something about it. You go, what a brilliant thing to do. And she becomes an international star. How is she going to live from now on? The poor thing. Her whole life it's like being Shirley Temple or, some Michael Jackson or some child star, that you're suddenly thrust into this role. But I have nothing but admiration for her. But I think you talked about the situation being dire. There's a question. When Donald Trump patented the expression "Make America Great Again," which apparently he did, as soon as he used the expression, I went, when's the great point that he's trying to return to? And I don't mean anything derogatory. America has made remarkable achievements.
Columbus, I think. That's the high point when he comes in.
Yeah, when they got rid of him.
That's right.
Or Colon, that was his actual name. Did you know that? Christopher Colon. And it's changed for some reason to Columbus. Probably because European Americans don't want to think, oh God, we were discovered by a bowel.
Is that true?
Yeah, Christopher Colon.
Huh. Interesting.
shocking, isn't it? The way that history distorts things. Adolf Hitler. You see, it makes a difference if you have the full name.
And it makes more sense.
Schicklgruber, that's what Winston Churchill used to call him. Greta Thunberg and all that. So the point is, when was it not dire? The human situation, as far as I can make out, was pretty much possibly the Indus Valley civilization, because we know so little about it. There have been, living with the Kogi up the mountainside in Colombia, there may have been a few non-dire moments, but at the moment we're living in the best of times ever. Those of us in the West who have enough to eat, we're living in the deluxe, the most luxurious society of all time that gives us so many advantages, and we're still not happy with it. We still have to watch YouTube and listen to this show or whatever it is we're doing. To keep. But when was the situation not dire? I can't think of when. What I can think of, that there's what's that site called? Factfulness. I think it's called Factfulness, and they wrote a book too, in which they say that you do this survey with people, and basically it's like, oh no, it's all going to hell. We're completely screwed. That's our attitude about the world. And they show that we're statistically wrong.
Oh, yeah, they got experts to guess what they thought the statistics would be on certain things, and then they show that.
So dire poverty, for example, they're talking about, 1900? Over 60% of people lived in 1914.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. 67.2%, something percentage. We're going to make that up, but somewhere in 60s percentile lived in abject poverty. Now it's only 10% of the people. And I'm kind of going, that means 750 million people. But nonetheless, a transformation has occurred. During Victorian times, a friend of mine was talking to him about the family yesterday, and he said he thinks that biologically there's an imperative. He thinks it's probably dangerous that women are going off to work and should look after children, And I thought, oh, that's an interesting point of view. I haven't heard that one for a while. And I said to him, but the thing is, this notion of the family is 20th century, that working families, their children at the age of 4 started working. That was what happened in the US and in Europe in the 19th century. They went down the mines. They went up the chimneys to clean them. There was no this, middle-class family thing. About 10% of people could afford to do that. The aristocracy, of course, sent their kids away to school as fast as they could and had nannies and governesses. So it's only ever been a tiny amount of families where a woman could stay at home and look after children and have all of these values. I point that up to say that it's not great now, but it was a lot worse yesterday. So if we can, get over some of the basic ideas, if we stop creating, if we stop allowing and supporting dangerous, predatory people to be in charge of our affairs, predatory judges, predatory policemen, predatory teachers, if we can recognize these behaviors and either teach people to not behave that way or make sure that they can't harm us, by the gentlest means possible. That shift in society, which I think is happening. I think, that I'm proud that in 2003, 1 million people marched in London to say, not in our name. We don't want to fight a war in Iraq. In 1914, people queued up to go and kill the Germans. Similar queues. So, and in fact, of course, the whole women's suffrage movement subverted itself, let's tell the truth here, by joining up with the UK military and handing out white feathers with the guarantee that they would be given the vote if they did so. Oh, how are the mighty fallen? The terrorists of women's suffrage making a deal with the establishment. Oh, awful. Thankfully, they did get the vote, and so that was definitely a good thing. The problem is that though we've got the vote, we're still somehow not using it very well. We end up with dire choices between dire people. At the moment in this country, would I support Boris Johnson? Would I support Jeremy Corbyn? No.
Right.
Oh, damn, do I have any choice? It's the parting on the left is now a parting on the right, in the words of Pete Townsend, that great political commentator.
Choice between a turd and a giant douche, as South Park so eloquently.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Exactly.
No, yeah, that really is the choice. I mean, yeah. Particularly here in America.
I think it's particularly just about anywhere. We've got Emmanuel Macron versus Marine Le Pen in France. It's like, oh God, no. And we're seeing that the popularist. That's that thought that Macron took 80% of the Parliament, 80% of it, with a political party that was a year old. That was how disillusioned everybody was. And I'm sure that Donald Trump, even though he got 2.9 million less votes than Hillary Clinton, I'm sure that he got there because we're all sick and tired of these corrupt people. The problem is that making a billionaire president to get rid of the problem of billionaires controlling the economy might not have been the best decision.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's also, you can, the same is to an extent true with, Boris Johnson kind of portrays himself as a man of the people and has this sort of
West Region, which is the most expensive school.
Yeah, exactly, right.
I did 20 of our prime ministers, and his name isn't Boris, it's Alexander.
Yeah.
And he worked as a journalist for the Telegraph in Europe, making up stories about Europe, saying you've got to have, bent bananas and straight cucumbers. For years, he just made up lies. And he told his sister when he was a little boy, she said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Alexander, bearing in mind that is his real name. And he said, "I want to be king of the world."
Right.
Now he's our prime minister. Yeah. And he's the first prime minister. He's lost every motion. He's lost 6 motions. And now he's closed parliament. Well, if you're not going to play, I'm going away then. Unbelievable. But would I, Jeremy Corbyn? No, I wouldn't,
No, absolutely. And once again,
I'd rather die, I think.
Oh, please, yeah. And what an unpleasant person who definitely, he might have been watching your YouTube series on, I think like a cult leader.
He's one of our models, I think. Yeah. Somebody who is that insistently unpleasant, and yet managed at the last European election in Britain to get more votes for a party that was 6 weeks old than any other political party. It was like Brexit Party came first. Only 37% of people bothered to vote, which is the highest turnout in a European election that Britain has ever had. Though we really care about democracy. We fought, through the Chartist movement and all of these decades to get the vote. And now we can't be bothered to go out and use it because we don't know who to vote for. What could be interesting here is that there could be an incredible swing to the second party who scored 1% less than the Brexit Party, which was the Liberal Democrats, who are the descendant of a party that last was in power in 1923.
Right, and of course were completely ineffectual under Cameron.
Well, not completely ineffectual. 95% ineffectual.
Right, yeah.
But also their leader had also gone to Eton, as had David Cameron and Boris Johnson.
Both did things with pigs.
Oh, no. You're starting to get a theme here about, where you need to go to the most expensive school in Britain. That's where you need to go if you want to get ahead in our new democratic society, Oh, no.
John, do you see, just because we're sort of on the the political tip right now? Do you just see, this just seems to be one thing that strikes me, that the people that continue to rise to be politicians, and this should come as no surprise, are sort of proto-cult leaders or outright cult leaders. They certainly utilize a lot of predatory practices in order to get people under their sway. Do you think we can ever kind of get beyond that? And I say this because, again, like you were saying, the situation in the UK looks crappy to say, and the same here. But can we get past that?
Yeah, absolutely we can. If everybody who applied for political office had to do the Hare psychopathy checklist revised before they could stand, now their results would be published. They could still stand. But if you score between 40 is the maximum score, which we all aim for, and that's pretty much Ted Bundy. 30 to 40 makes you a psychopath, probably a criminal psychopath, the kind who will hurt people. Between 4 and 30 lists you as having a sociopathic tendency to whatever amount. So an ordinary man should be between 0 and 4 on the scale. Now, it's not a perfect scale, and sadly, the intelligent among the psychopaths will be able to pass it with some ease. But there is a misconception, a common one. Psychologists even repeat it, but there's no evidence to support it. There's a common idea that psychopaths are more intelligent than the rest of us. It's not true. They have the same averages of intelligence as anybody else. So quite a lot of them would fall if, and the problem with narcissists is if you encourage them to boast, if you're interrogated, if you just happen to be a forensic psychologist, just think that for a minute, and you sat there and you have a narcissist in front of you, how do they confess? Well, when you're watching your TV shows, they always confess in the same way, and it's true. You get them to boast. You get them to boast about what they did. I mean, the most horrifying one is Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler, who was, I think, the first person to be interviewed on film in California, while being interviewed. And 2 psychiatrists had pronounced him, wonderfully sane. But the 2 cops who tracked him down were just going, nope. And in the interview, you can actually see it in the interview. He cracks. And they get him to boast. And so there are ways and means of actually filtering these people out of parliaments, government, the diplomatic corps. What is peculiar, I'm sure you're very aware of Adam Curtis's work and things like The Power of Nightmares, HyperNormality is it HyperNormality, the current one. He's in many things. He gets into this thing, the von Hayek doctrine out of Chicago. Bless Chicago for all of the monsters the university has produced over the years, with Leo Strauss as well. But von Hayek's idea that the only thing that is consistent in a human being is selfishness. And so Margaret Thatcher, she actually did this questionnaire apparently, which Curtis finds out about. And the whole of our civil service are tested to see whether they're there for their own advancement or to help people. And whoever says they're there to help people is laid off, demoted, and the psychopaths are promoted. That impacted upon the Reagan administration. It was a secret she shared with Ronnie. And I think we've seen so much of that, and it's now time to actually weight this the other way, so that we actually commend honesty, we commend honour, we commend pro-social activity, rather than the presumption that everybody's a mean bastard and they're doing it for their own good. Understanding that, of course, the most powerful of narcissists are the ones who embrace us all within their narcissism and tell us how great we are.
So John von Neumann would say that it is in your best interest to be selfish.
Yeah, well, look what it did for John von Neumann, and look at that Russell Crowe bloke in that
yeah, but
that film.
Yeah, that Russell.
About what's his name? The Nash.
Yeah, Nash.
A beautiful
and he ended up saying, "Why did they take me seriously? I'm schizophrenic."
It's actually in one of Adam Curtis's interviews. He interviews Nash, one of the guys who gave us the mutually assured destruction, domino theory, game theory, all of this slew of crazy. And he's saying, why did they believe me? I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. It's like, And we do. We're living in a world where the political systems were designed by paranoid schizophrenics and psychopaths. And we need to, dial that down a bit. We need to, and that means also looking at the invisible networks of influence, the old boy networks, the secret societies. We've all been, I'm sure, Piers, you're tremendously worried about the Illuminati and their influence.
Yeah.
Particularly upon the kind of soap we get and toothpaste. But realizing that out there you've actually got the family. And it's not Charles Manson's family. In fact, it's a lot more dangerous than Charles Manson's family. They killed 7 people. Looking at this peculiar secret society that permeates not simply US politics now, but politics throughout the world, which has this insane philosophy. They look to Romans 16, and it says, or they interpret to mean, that if you have power, it's because God wants you to have power, so therefore you should serve the leaders. That, David was a rotten bad man. He not only got Bathsheba pregnant, he then tried to get her husband to have sex with her, and her husband fell asleep because he was drunk. So he had to send him to his death in battle, And therefore, leaders can do horrible things to people. And finally, to complete this robust philosophy, the poor get what they deserve. And
right.
A group of people with these views, including Hillary Clinton, including Donald Trump, including, it would appear, Barack Obama, have only the Bushes since Eisenhower have been invulnerable to this doctrine because they're end days Christians, right?
Well, I know, it's just, Skull and Bones. They have their own secret society and their own. It
just keeps on moving. But you get, I'm reading The Family, and I've got to the bit where 750,000 people are being murdered in Indonesia, and by the time you get to East Timor, where 200,000 people are murdered, because the idea is the 650,000 people of East Timor, just granted independence, are any minute going to make a communist invasion of Indonesia, which has a population of 140 million. So it's really worrying. So we've got to go and perform genocide on them. And seeing how much involved these supposed Christians of the family, the fellowship, the followers of David Coe and his friends, how involved they were in that mass murder. And that group is still there, still this super cult that has put itself into invisible influence and even talks about invisible influence. Don't let anybody see you there pulling the strings. We can most surely do something about that. We can most surely expose these people and demand that our politicians pass certain ethical tests now. Demand that. One of the things that changed in England, in the UK, was we had a terrible scandal about politicians spending, claiming expenses. There was one, I think, with Nicholas Soames, grandson of Winston Churchill, just thrown out of the Conservative Party for voting against them. But I think he'd had a moat refitted around his house. Of course, most English houses still have a moat these days. And a drawbridge and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know if you've ever been over here, Piers, but it's perfectly normal. And so he'd actually had this paid for by the people through taxes because he was opposed. So there's a bit of a scandal. And sadly, we had to send a few members of Parliament to prison.
What a shame. Well, but we're at the end of the first hour here, Jon, and I will continue this in the second hour. Once again, I'm joined by Jon and Sam Atack. We are going to be continuing this conversation and expanding it and talking about some other related topics in the second hour. So please stay tuned.
Straight out of the subway in New York City. Yeah, baby. The radio show that never sleeps. Porkins Policy Radio with Pierce Redmond.
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com. The brilliant author of The War State brings you exclusive reports about the big changes upcoming in the markets. WallStreetWindow.com.
Perhaps you're invested deeply.
Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
News, entertainment, and more. You will learn something, children's. Ocelli.com.
Well, I was sitting around my house, oh, and as I looked around, you know the worries in my life.
Uncle, somebody told me the other day that martial law is coming. We're going to get thrown into FEMA camps. Should I be scared or not?
No. That is a,
It might be true. Could be.
Could be, but I don't think so.
I'll bet I know who would know. Somebody who does a show on the Ocelli.com radio network.
Somebody will know. Charlie.com would know. He will know.
Better listen to it.
Better listen to him. And he knows what he's talking about.
Ocelli.com.
Charlie.com.
Now back to the man, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we are speaking with Jon and Sam Atack, good friends of the show. They have a brand new YouTube channel, which I highly recommend everyone goes and checks out. It is called Opening Minds. It will be linked up to in the show notes. They've got some really good short video series that they're doing. One, I think like a cult leader. They have one on, how to protect yourself against human predators.
The techniques of seduction and recruitment.
Yeah. They're really good stuff.
I've got some new stuff coming up as well, which is going to be, that JP Sears does funny stuff and serious stuff. Mm-hmm. And the serious stuff he does is rubbish. Like he gives you advice about depression and basically snap out of it.
That's actually something I'd love to talk to you because.
Well, I just want to follow on, in his footsteps. So we do funny stuff, which is great. But I've also got some stuff where I'm being quite serious about mindfulness. Just how dangerous that can be. And I do speak as an expert here. I learned the Zen meditation at the age of 18 from somebody qualified to teach it. It only takes 3 minutes, but we won't get into that. About enlightenment, about authority. So we've got some new videos that are going up in the next week or so, which is basically me being intolerably boring. You realize there are only two ways of getting to people on the internet, let's face it. One of them is you do something so stupid that it'll go viral. And the other is you shout at people. So, I'm working towards it. I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm thinking of becoming a Baptist minister for a little while and, really getting myself into a good shouting mode.
But, maybe watch some Stefan Molyneux videos.
Isn't he brilliant? Apparently, according to him, he's the cleverest man who's ever lived. Did you know that?
Yeah, I mean,
he's got more humility than Donald Trump.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, right. He terrifies me only in that he's so blatant. I mean, he doesn't even really hide it. Like you said, that he's the smartest person, the cleverest person,
the most narcissistic person.
Right? Yeah, he's just like everything.
Yeah, and he actually has the intelligence of a packet of frozen peas. That's about the highest point that he comes to. He just spouts idiocy. The idea that the best, and then you meet somebody who's a victim of his. I a couple of times I've met with a woman her son was 17 years old. She found a note on the pillow that he would never see her again. And, she's a perfectly lovely woman. But her son, in a moment of insecurity, 17 years old, had been convinced by this awful, evil human being, Stefan Molyneux, to defoo, to abandon his family of origin, because that was going to solve his problems. This man is a menace. But anyway, that's how I feel about Stefan Molyneux. Sorry, that was a bit of an Epstein moment for me there.
Well, no, what I was just gonna quickly, and then we'll dive back into some serious topics. But I am interested.
Are there any serious topics?
We'll try.
Okay. Well, we're going to believe you for a moment there, Piers. But at the moment, we think everything is pretty ridiculous.
Sorry. Well, speaking of ridiculous, I'm glad you brought up the thing about JP Sears. I think the ultra spiritual videos are amazing, but some of his like you said, his serious stuff. He's
being an idiot.
So he is just like a life coach, which is such a crock of BS.
Yeah. Put the headband back on, so we know which one you are.
Well, that is how you tell.
Yeah, if he's got the plastic headband on, he'll be funny. Otherwise, he'll just talk nonsense that he's got out of a self-help book.
I ended up watching like 30 minutes of one of them, thinking he was going to be funny at some point.
Come on.
I know, and it never happens.
What's the punchline?
Right. And what's so interesting is like he is so spot on with ultra spiritual people, and I mean there's so many. I love the one about like indigo children. It's a personal favorite.
And do the Burning Man in your own home.
Yeah. And of course the old ones, the ayahuasca one is amazing.
Vegan pizza made from cucumber.
Oh yeah. Just like real.
And it is spiritual. I think that's the thing that the deep spirituality of visiting Boulder, Colorado, for example.
Right.
Which is filled with white people for some reason.
Yeah. They're white. They're all white. That's the diversity of the new age, But it is peculiar, isn't it, that when you take people who are acting the fool to make a living, and you then get them to become your philosophers and wise men, things don't work out too well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and again, if you watch enough of his videos, I mean, he also does it's sort of like counseling. Over Skype for people, and they're like paying him money. And I knew someone quite well.
JP Sears money, that's got to be wrong.
No, I knew someone
from a religious point of view. I think that's got to be wrong.
Yes, right. I knew someone quite well who got very involved in life coaching, and she ended up, basically just going into debt. Destroying her relationships and kind of like losing her mind, and people do with the life coaching thing that does happen. I mean, it's a lot of people, I think, again, that get involved in cult groups who are searching for something, or they're depressed, or they're having trouble in their lives for a variety of reasons, and they turn to life coaching.
Generally, what's happened is that they're dislocated. Generally what happens, people go into a new belief system, a new relationship, because their rituals, their habits, something as significant has changed in the normal course of their life. That's the vulnerability. They've moved to another town, they've started at university, they've lost a relationship, so on and so forth. And at that point, we're all of us vulnerable to, hey, I'm going to fill the hole in your rituals and routines and give you something completely different to do. And when it gets to the life coaching, I haven't heard much about this. This is very interesting. That somebody can commit to somebody helping them have a better life and bankrupt them while doing it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean...
that's Scientology. Sorry.
No, but it's up there with that. Where because they go to these these courses, again, sort of Scientology lexicon here, and you can spend $5,000. I don't know what. I guess to be a life coach or something. I mean, almost is like, at least in Scientology, you can aspire to, maybe be in the Sea Org and you get like a nice fun outfit to wear. But with the life coaches, I mean, there's nothing. It's just spending money.
I'm going to let you in on a secret here. The uniform they use is a Coast Guard uniform.
Right.
So without signing a billion-year contract, you too can go to an Army and Navy store and buy one of those uniforms. And just like the famous Captain Bill Robertson used to do, you can prance about in front of the mirror every night in the costume. Captain Bill was a bit different. He used to dress up in ladies' ball gowns and sing songs to Ron Hubbard in the mirror. And the amazing thing about Bill, and I knew Bill very well, about 8 months he lived in the town where I lived, and he spent a lot of time trying to re-recruit me. And I liked his company. I enjoyed him, though he was somewhat eccentric. There is actually a larger movement now outside Scientology, the Ronzorg, started by this man who he was 6'4". He'd been a motorcycle cop in Mississippi at the time of Mississippi burning, in the early 60s. And here he is. He becomes the captain of Hubbard's ship, the Apollo. The first book I wrote about Scientology was about this guy, and then I realised nobody could understand it until I ended up he got written out of the book in the end. So we must publish that one day. But he would, for real, 6'4", drove a Harley Davidson. He would, for real, 8 o'clock in the evening. I knew his girlfriend there very well, a really good friend of mine, and she came round one day in tears saying, "He's never had sex with me." 8 months they'd lived together. And every Saturday she'd be taken to the outsized women's clothing store and he'd point out what he wanted. And he'd have a nice glittery 6'4" motorcycle cop. And he would dress up and then sing songs to L. Ron Hubbard 75 million years ago. Now, there are some people who'd say that was normal behaviour, but I'm not one of them. I mean, dressing up in ladies' clothing, good luck to him. But singing songs to L. Ron Hubbard 75 million years ago, you can't hear songs that are sung 75 million years later.
Can.
Oh, yeah, that's probably true. Anyway, we were going to say something rude about the family.
Yeah, let's just you brought it up and this might be something maybe John we could.
Can I read you a little bit from?
Please,
just a little bit from Jeff Charlotte's book, The Family. This is from a talk, a recorded talk by Doug Coe, who was after Abraham Vereida died. This guy Coe came out of nowhere and took over in the late 60s, early 70s. And so this is from a lecture. All that matters is the social order. Jesus says you have to put me before other people and you have to put me before yourself. Hitler said that was the demand, and this is Coe speaking, Hitler, that was the demand of the Nazi party. Coe slaps the podium and the Fuhrer creeps into his mannerisms. You have to put the Nazi party and its objectives in front of your own life and ahead of other people. Now he's Coe again. I've seen a picture of young men in the Red Guard of China, he says. A table, laid out like a butcher table. They would bring in this young man's mother and father, lay her on the table with a basket on the end, and he would take an axe and cut her head off. Now he's Mao, punctuating his words by slapping his pulpit. They have to put the purposes of the Red Guard ahead of the mother, father, brother, sister, their own life. He pauses, makes the fist. That was a covenant, a pledge. That was what Jesus said. Now he's Jesus. If you do not put me before your father, bang, your mother, bang, your brother, bang, your sister, bang, you cannot be my disciple. So, that kind of puts it into focus, doesn't it? That he's selling something that, Mao sold and that Hitler sold, but now it's Jesus. And so now it's good. So all of those Red Guards who chopped their mothers' heads off, and there was a bit of a confusion of tense in there because you had the mother and the father coming in, but only the mother was beheaded. I hope that, that there will be points at the end of the show for any listener who noticed that David Coe, as with many sociopaths, had difficulties with grammatical construction. There's a little point that most people don't know that Robert Hare points out. It could be why L. Ron Hubbard said that the most dangerous thing to you intellectually is a misunderstood word, and then wrote, made enough of them
dictionaries,
500-page dictionaries. Yeah. When I first arrived in Scientology, I was told I was going to be doing a course called OTTR0, and you go, what? Yeah, that's an operating thetan training routine. It's a what? Well, a thetan is the self, the soul of the person, but not the same. Okay, an operating thetan. It's like, come on, guys, you are kidding me. Hubbard said that it leads you to commit overts, to make negative actions against others if you have misunderstood words. And then, the technique itself, by the way, of OTTR0 for any completists in our audience, was stolen from Aleister Crowley. You sit with your eyes closed in front of another person. It's a technique devised by Hubbard's mentor, Aleister Crowley. Though I've read in a couple of sociology textbooks that while they admit that Hubbard was, very interested in Crowley, none of the techniques of Scientology actually come from Crowley. Well, that one does. Along, of course, with the belief in prenatal trauma and past lives, but let's not go there. We're talking about the family, not Charles Manson's family, as I've pointed out, which was far less dangerous. This invidious, invisible group that has not only penetrated American political life and corrupted it, because is it called the Establishment Clause? That the separation of church and state?
Correct.
So fundamentally, they violated the first law upon which the Constitution rests, and they are therefore all criminals. That would particularly, people like Gerald Ford, who was very much working on behalf of the family, in pardoning Nixon and co. But there are individuals who actually committed, wouldn't that be treason? Wouldn't that be the highest offence possible against the state? And we're suggesting that from Eisenhower onwards, most of the presidents have actually committed that crime. I mean, that's a pretty weird state of affairs, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, isn't the even these sort of things we think of as being benign, the National Prayer Breakfast? I believe that's found. That was the fellowship, which is essentially the family.
Yeah, and it traces back to 1935 when Abram Veride becomes involved with the National Association of Manufacturers by setting up the International Christian League, and they are going to bring down the New Deal. They are going to stop Roosevelt. They're going to kill off the labor movement, and they're going to assert the hegemony of industrial capitalism. And, they're what is it? The American Way. That was the slogan of the National Association. They spent $5 million, the National Association of Manufacturers, and this is back in the 30s, so we're talking $500 million or something, in advertising to take down the elected president of the United States. And the horror is that, you got the New Deal, then you got Truman's Fair Deal, and then you got no deal. And so much has been wasted. The resources of the US are massive resources. And the good heart of most people in the United States has been wasted to fight pointless wars, to overthrow democracies and install dictatorships. Papa Doc put there, Somoza in Nicaragua, the Shah of Iran, the overthrow of Allende, just one place after another. And the family have been involved in all of these, in all of the Central American takeovers, operating very significantly out of Costa Rica, which I think is about the only country in the world that doesn't have an army. And that's because it doesn't need one, because it's got the National Security Agency and the family looking after it.
Oh, and Costa Rica has always been, during the trouble in Nicaragua, that's where all the Contras were based out of Costa Rica.
Well, not quite all of them. Eden Pastora was based on the one end, and there were others up the other end. But we get very pedantic about Nicaraguan history in this household, I'm afraid.
John, I mean, just again on the fellowship, the family, because, and this was when I saw it, I even kind of was like, oh, another thing. I didn't know nearly enough about it, which I think speaks volumes to how secret they are as an organization. Yeah. Even me, a die-in-the-wool conspiracy theorist, was I was unaware of their influence. But I think people have kind of like shifted away from it's almost like fundamentalist Christian ideology is like old hat. It's like it's not the exciting new dangerous religious cult that it once was. Although, from my understanding of the fellowship and the family, they seem to be still doing gangbusters. Is that a correct, analysis? Or
well, it's very interesting to see how many of the mainline churches, and indeed churches that would consider themselves fundamentalist, how much they dislike the family. Because the family represents a very narrow strip of theological belief, which is odious and offensive to any decent human being. Let's be honest about this. The idea that the rich and powerful deserve to be rich and powerful. Well, didn't Jesus say something about camels and eyes of needles and rich people? So that idea of entitlement, he also said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, render unto God that which is God's. I'm an agnostic, but grew up within the Anglican confession. And I respect these ideas, and seeing, just how negative this, we're going to base this movement on Hitler, and we're going to approve genocide. We're going to be involved in the murder of hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people. This cannot be right. It cannot be decent. It cannot be proper. And so it's not fundamentalism per se. If you looked at, say, the People's Temple with Jim Jones, you could say, oh, well, that's just a form of Christian belief. But it ended up with over 900 people dead. And I read something the other day that said 900 people committed suicide.
Including the children.
Yeah, including the children who were poisoned by their own parents. That's, this strange perception. Or
all those people that were shot or had needle marks in their arms.
And there were... And the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments in 2000, there were 500 of them died. Again, a Christian group, or supposedly Waco. You're dealing with a Christian group, a bizarre one, but it doesn't really matter what the ideology is. What does matter is the perversion of the ideology, and that with the family, it's the scale of it. That without so much, Jeff Charlotte has done such an incredible job of pulling the material together. The astonishing thought is that the family basically just archived their documents in a public library. These geniuses. They said, oh, right, let's put those boxes somewhere. I know, the public library, nobody will look there. And so he's able to actually pull out letters that were written which support this horrifying tale and show, the tentacles of this awful movement all through the world, because they're also involved with Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. They're involved in a variety of African countries.
Uganda, right?
Uganda, Nigeria. And you start, it's like, where have the conspiracy theorists been? Jeff Shaw talking about this for 10 years, and I'm still having people try to persuade me that our dear Queen is a lizard who's transcendental in some way. It's like, come on, get real. Don't be nutcases. Go after the family. Look at the influence that this can have, and just how wrong it is that any kind of religion, any kind of politics, any kind of belief system. I believe in humanity. I believe that human beings should always have rights. And any system that preaches harming other people, for me, is wrong. I don't care whose name it's put out under. If we don't have compassion and maybe a little bit of humility, which I'm going to work on one day myself. If we don't have compassion and a little bit of humility, then whatever we are talking about is wrong. What we're doing is wrong, because we're not supporting our fellow human beings. We're not maintaining our species. I'm not too worried about whether mosquitoes survive into the next century, but I do have some concerns about our own species. And I know that those dangers come from people who don't care. They don't care. You get some Christians who go, well, look, Jesus is coming back, so why bother with the environment? And then you get some Christians who'll say, yeah, but Jesus will want the environment to be nice when he comes back. There are all sorts of ways of thinking about it, but the ways that say, let's look after one another, let's make sure there's enough for everyone enough, that people are not starving to death, that people can get an education, which seems to be something that is now more possible on the internet than it is in schools, which really scares me. That Khan Academy is so much better. The math and the biology are so much better than anything you can get in a school in this country, because the guy's such a great teacher, and those two subjects come over really well. Crash Course I have a bit more difficulty with because I'm not intelligent enough for it, but the 9 million subscribers seem to be doing reasonably well with it. That there is this movement in our society, and I think there's this other thing, which is the sense of responsibility. That at Nuremberg, it was decided that when somebody who'd been accused of mass murder said, Befehl ist Befehl, orders are orders, I was just doing what I was told, that's no longer an excuse in law. Right. And that's kind of interesting because, whenever a cop arrests somebody for having a marijuana joint in one of the states where they're still not legal, is he committing an immoral act? Should he arrest himself for doing that? This is the question we have to ask ourselves. Befehl ist Befehl. Orders are orders. I was just doing my duty. Surely the point is I'm responsible for everything I do. If I'm not to be a cult member, then I'm responsible for what I do. And when something presents itself to me in the world as damaging and dangerous, I have to pick my battles because we only have so much time. But we should be looking to make the world a better place. So going down what you're saying about plastic and water filters, we've got all of this recycling thing. Now, I remember the hippie days when it used to be reuse, reduce, recycle. Now people think that by sending plastic on an endless loop, we're going to save the world in some way by using all of this energy to basically make fleece linings for our jackets, using formaldehyde in the mix to recycle our plastic, rather than saying we have to change everything at this moment in the world. Robotization is here. We can use it. The idea of imposing a 40, 50-hour week on people, working week, is no longer relevant. Having slaves in camps in Indonesia and Vietnam and China to make shit for us that we can then throw away is not a good place to go. And that segs us from the family into Xinjiang, which is wasn't that good? I didn't know.
That's a good segue, John. Let's talk about Xinjiang. This is something that I have definitely discussed on the show in the past. Certainly, me and Christoph Gehrman have talked about the geopolitics of Xinjiang and China on our podcast series that will hopefully be coming back sometime in October or November.
But everyone out there ought to rush out then.
Yes, exactly. And this is something I got to say that definitely when I've talked about it in the past, it was always we were specifically talking about the extremist groups like the East Turkestan Islamic Party, which is aligned with Al Qaeda, even the World Turkestan Congress. Seems to take a lot of money from the State Department and, some interesting Americans and institutions.
And there are links also to the Taliban. But,
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And,
you're looking
that's
at a
one thing.
Population of 12 million Uighur peoples, most of whom have nothing to do with anything of that, and 1 million of them are now in prison. Their children are being taken away from them. They're being taught to speak Cantonese, and they renounce their Islamic faith. These children. I saw a film of a guy watching it's a little film that's gone onto the internet of his son. Now he can't see his son anymore because if he goes back to Xinjiang from Turkey, he will go to prison. He'll go into one of the re-education camps. So there he is watching a video of his son online, 6 years old, singing a song in Chinese and talking about how much he loves the motherland China. And that's what's happened to his own child, and there's nothing he can do about it. The state now has control. This 1 million people, nearly 10% of the population in prison. The Chinese government, really having denied completely that these camps existed, then produced film showing the happy inmates. And as my oldest son pointed out, the happy inmates have bruised faces. They're dancing and singing because what is said about the Uighur by the Han Chinese is they love to dance and sing. This is the standard stereotypical formula. Well, so, frankly, if I lived in East Turkestan, or Xinjiang, the new province, as the Chinese call it, I probably would want to be independent of China too. If I was a Muslim, I'd probably be looking at and they are Muslims, I've been told that my faith was a terrorist act. My beliefs were impermissible by, in the autonomous republic of Xinjiang, as the Chinese call it. I would be very tempted to find anyone who could help me to escape from that situation. Having said that, anybody that associates with Al Qaeda, the Taliban, or the State Department should be watched very carefully indeed.
Well, and this is there's so much to unpack there.
Particularly the State Department.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, number one, like you said, 1 million people. That's a huge amount of the population. And let's just assume that everyone that's in these camps, which again, it's interesting. You point out, John, they're sort of denied the existence of them. But now, you see, Chinese officials, and certainly regional officials in Xinjiang talking about how wonderful these camps are now. So they do exist,
just as they were in 1949 when
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Was first introduced by Mao.
It's not as if this is like a new concept, but let's even just assume that everyone that's taken to the camps are all fanatical members of ETIM or other groups.
That huge million-member terrorist group.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. Let's imagine it's 1 million of them. Even so, forcibly imprisoning people and then deprogramming them and I guess reprogramming them is not useful. And this doesn't work. Like, again,
unless you want the Cultural Revolution to be the next step in your evolution, because that's what happened the last time. These kids that Doug Coe is talking about, who are chopping their mothers' heads off, were basically the generation after the re-education camps, brainwashing camps were introduced.
Yeah, and this is the thing.
So it'll just make that happen again.
Well, yeah, and again, even, it's like assuming that, the problem exists. It's, and then you look at ETIM, Al-Qaeda, even the Taliban to an extent. These are cult-like groups. I mean, I'd say Al-Qaeda, and other groups are much more, sort of top-down, traditional, high-control, cult-like groups. The Taliban is a little bit different. But, just let's assume that they're like that. Kidnapping people and then is not the way to kind of to help them. And we've talked about this before. And it's interesting, that who is praising these camps? People like Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, which is rich coming from that, Saudi Arabia, because of course they're the sort of the main exporters of this extreme form of Islam, Wahhabism. But it's like it doesn't work in those countries either. You can look at like Yemen has tried this in the past. These sort of essentially re-education camps, they don't really work. People end up shifting either back into Al-Qaeda or into some other sort of criminal enterprise because they're so damaged. Not only from the being recruited into Al-Qaeda and then deprogrammed, essentially just being tortured all over again by the government. And then they're just sort of left like, and it's just like, well, go and do whatever now, figure it out. It doesn't really work. And I'm shocked.
It doesn't work. It can't work. It won't ever work. But the overkill that's happening in Xinjiang, have to point out that a lot of the material that's coming out of there is coming out through Han Chinese risking their lives. And the Han make up more than 90% of the population of the whole of so-called China. But they risk their lives taking, videos on their cameras and getting this stuff out to us. And there's now enough material that there is no doubt. I saw an interview with a teacher from one of the camps, and she's saying, well, all the women in the camps are given a chemical. And she said, I was told this by one of the nurses. They're given a chemical so they'll stop having periods. And unfortunately, this can have an effect on them for the rest of their lives. And then I see an interview with a woman in Turkey who's escaped one of the camps saying, yep, they gave me this stuff and I stopped having periods. Now, when you've added up enough evidence, you get that what President Xi is doing is nothing to do with the tiny riots that have occurred in Xinjiang in the mid-1990s, the early noughties, again, I think 2009.
Yes.
Where a small amount of people have died, which is terrible. There have been filmed attacks upon Han Chinese, but then again you have this other thing, which is there are 12 million Uighur in Xinjiang, and they've now had 9 million Han Chinese moved in with them. On their streets, in their main cities, there is a police booth at least every 200 meters with a Han Chinese policeman in it. There is a segregation of the society, which you can see on film and through the evidence of witnesses. I've just read a book called The Tree That Bleeds by an English guy who taught in Xinjiang in the noughties, just talking about what the society is like and the division within the society. That you've got, in the education system, you've got the bit that's for the Han and the bit that's for the Uighur. And, the occasional Kazakhstani or what have you who's wandered in there. But what's happened is this is a people who've been, imagine, you're in New York or New Jersey and suddenly your population has doubled with immigrants who speak another language, who don't believe in your culture at all, and who are now going to take your kids away from you and get them, let's say the Canadians invaded. And all your children had to speak Canadian. They had to say things like boots. See?
Boot time. That was all.
But no, imagine that, the way the British took Aborigine and the Australians took Aborigine children away. In the US, Native American children were forced into schools where they would have to wear little dresses or, European clothes. I just read Killers of Flower Moon. Have you read that?
I haven't. I've heard of it, though.
Yeah, the Osage, who at the time are they're the richest people in the world per capita because of the oil that's under the rubbish land they were given. But they're treated as minors. They don't have rights in law. So they each have to have a guardian to be in charge of these millions. And tens of them are murdered. And nothing happens to stop it. Because the guardianship rights... And you finally find out that it's like the banker, the lawyer, it's all the head people. All the white Europeans have just moved in on them and done and performed this horrible takeover. Well, that is very much what's happening to the Uighur. Are they terrorists because they want independence for their people from an oppressive majority that has just, look what happened in Tibet, that has just started moving into their country? There's got to be some other way, but what is that way? And what the Chinese will create, undoubtedly, just as, Guantanamo Bay and the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. When 9/11 happened, Mark Sageman, the psychiatrist, reckons there were 479 people in the 4 disparate groups that were lumped together by the media as Al-Qaeda. There were 479 people. After the invasion of Iraq, there were 35,000 people. The creation of Daesh, or the Republican Guard, as I like to think of it, you get rid of the whole of the military, and then you create a country that has not a single representative of the 40% Sunni people in Iraq. And oddly enough, that army then goes and takes a chunk of Syria and, under the leadership of a guy with a rapper's name, Baghdadi.
And complete with a Rolex watch and
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, a very absurd. But these rather obvious things, and then the Turks start killing the Kurds, stopping. And the US goes, "Oh, we're not doing anything about that." You get all of this madness emerges, but it's all incredibly predictable if you have any intelligence, and. Our countries have intelligence agencies. They don't just have intelligence, they have whole agencies full of it. And you look at it time and time again. In 2003, it was obvious that the invasion of Iraq was going to cause a civil war between the Kurds, the Shiites, and the Sunni. It was obvious. It was so obvious that I remarked upon it to somebody at the time. I also suggested it would go on for about 30 years. And I hope that wasn't true, but we're 16 years in.
Tomorrow is the anniversary of 9/11, and it's 18 years, and we're still in Afghanistan, and it won't be until 2021 that we might just maybe have Khalid Sheikh Mohammed put on trial. So a good 20 years after the crimes.
But that's an advance, isn't it? Habeas corpus only used to last 24 hours. And
Right, exactly. But
make
Jon,
America great again.
Back to the Uighur thing, because I know I'm gonna get people complaining about this and this is where I think it even becomes a larger issue. I mean, number one, like what you were saying, I don't think that Xi Jinping and it's not even just him specifically, the central government in China, this is less about terrorism and more about, fulfilling this sort of like manifest destiny, it seems almost, of the, of I guess the Han Chinese across this massive country.
It's got nothing to do with terrorism.
Yeah. And then this is that interesting thing too. It's and I get this all the time. People on the political left, and I count myself as on the left for sure. And I'm willing to attack America and Western imperialism and all that kind of stuff till the cows come home. But that doesn't mean that the supposed polar opposite of that is good and justified and benevolent in everything it does.
Let's just cut through this completely. 4% of Chinese people belong to the Communist Party. The only representatives put up at election are those chosen by the Communist Party. This is not a left-wing country. This is a fascist country, just as the USSR was a fascist country, just as Cuba has been a fascist country. And I'm not pro-communist. I'm not Marxist. I'm not even pro-socialist particularly. And when it comes to the political spectrum, I think if you go left or right, you'll come off the road. So you need to go straight ahead. You need to be democratic. You need to be consensus, allowing rights, not saying, well, the workers, the tools of production should be in the hands of the workers and everybody should be paid the same money and what have you. It's never happened. The notion of the Soviets was a great idea. It was a wonderful idea, and I think workers' cooperatives are a wonderful idea. And I'm with Studs Terkel, who was stood at a bus stop one day, and he heard a couple of yuppies going, "Oh, socialism's such a terrible thing." Except they wouldn't have said it in the Queen of England's accent, obviously. That's my problem there. And Terkel said, do you know why you work an 8-hour day? Do you know how many people died at the barricades to get you the yuppie lifestyle you have now? So I'm all for, people standing up for their rights and all of that. But it's pointless suggesting that that China was ever a communist country. Mao Zedong spent most of his time reading the lives of the emperors and acting upon it. He was a preening narcissist. He was an evil man. He killed 70 million people, and yet there are still huge, great posters of him all over China. He's revered as a hero. He is the greatest monster in all of history. So communism, schmommunism. It's not about that. It's if somebody on the left really believes that that's how Marxism works, then good luck to them. That's Oswald Mosley, Hitler, Franco, Mussolini, same doctrine, and it fits together. It's national socialism.
Right, yeah.
And as Marx said, without the Internationale, you cannot have communism. So I'm afraid until all of us are persuaded that we've got to do what Marx said. Have you ever read Kropotkin's letter to Marx, where Kropotkin, they met with Proudhon in 1848, I think, in Paris. They sat around a table. What a thought.
Oh, no.
And Kropotkin wrote a letter to Marx in which he explained why his version of anarchy, because Marx was an anarchist, he was not a communist, but communism was meant to lead towards this perfect system where you don't need government. And Kropotkin explains to him why it won't work. And the letter is chilling because it predicts exactly what Lenin did. And also, 1850, or something like this.
And there's also Marx, who was basically just, he would go without food. And by him going without food, I mean, he would not buy food for his own family and then, ask Engels endlessly for money. The factory owner.
Oh, he's a scrounger.
Bankrolled.
He's a bloody scrounger. And Engels went on about the matriarchal society and said that the Iroquois represented the pinnacle of society. But sadly, that was before anybody had written any histories of the Iroquois, and the tribal leaders were women. And they were called, when you look at the torture they used, they were the most sadistic people who've ever lived. And I'm not going to get into any details, but I'm really not. But Engels said, they are the perfect society, the matriarchy. No, you nasty people, men or women, should not be in charge. People who want to have power shouldn't have power. That's the way I figure it, and I'm not sure we get round that one.
No, and that's to those on the left that somehow view China as that it's really communist when, like you said, it's not. Also, just it's such a hyper-capitalist society right now.
Communism plus.
Yeah, I know. It's other than the flag, there's nothing that's overtly communistic about that. But
President Xi is a billionaire.
Exactly.
He's not a humble man of the people.
No, and then beyond that too, it's this. I don't understand this and I think it's just it is like this almost this sort of culty adherence that but they're great. They're it's like so many people on the left, just like on the extreme right as well, they fall into this dichotomy where it's like good and evil are fighting one another, and only the good will prevail, and they will
Manichaean doctrine. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, they will sort of like save the planet or clear the planet. I am
your father, Luke.
Exactly. That's and they view that it's like, well, because China is against Western dominance and imperialism, therefore it's good. And this is the same thing with this weird obsession in the alternative community and on the left with Putin. And look at, again, just to try to bring it all full circle, every leader in any country exploits terrorist, actions and things, whether they are the root cause of it or not, to benefit themselves.
That was true of the leaders of Bhutan.
Maybe not Bhutan. That might be the one exception to the rule.
Ladakh, Andorra.
Oh, yeah, but who cares what goes on in Andorra, right?
I think it's certainly true to say that, the majority of politicos will use these absurd arguments and exaggerations to give us some sense that, this is the right way or the wrong way. Look at the way that Britain, America, and France fueled Iraq. When the Iraq War started, Saddam Hussein owed over £450 million for arms to Britain. And we weren't paid. And, we didn't get the oil concessions there. That's not fair, is it? What actually happened was, because of our incredibly sane political system, we have a guarantee for arms manufacturers so that the government guarantees. So that £450 million in arms that was used against us by the Iraqis, we paid for. And how many people could we have fed and sent to school for that £450 million that we gave to a bloke? I mean, didn't the CIA give him $2 billion to create a long tube that you could fire shells at Israel to? Because, as they said, it'll never work.
Right, yeah.
Oh, we just give them a couple of $1 billion, it'd be okay.
Oh, yeah, just imagine, how many schools you could build or teachers that you could fund that's just like, the whole, most of the root problems in the world could be solved by just cutting the Pentagon.
It's super how many schools you could burn down.
Yeah, right. No, but see, that's my thing, John. It's like it's the same thing. I think if you think more critically and about what's going on in China, that's essentially, Xi and whoever replaces him will continue to exploit that, and they want terrorism to exist. They want
terrorism was the peace dividend.
Right.
How are we to keep the military functioning without something going on? And so you get a terrible situation where 3,000 people die in New York City. How terrible. And so 750,000 people die in Iraq. 200,000 people die in Afghanistan. There has to come a point where you realize this isn't working, that we've now got 50,000 Daesh, ISIS, ISIL fighters, many of whom are going to be getting home. And if we don't use something like the Aarhus treatment in Denmark, this country is just denying them re-entry. 50,000 people who've been radicalized to the extreme, most of them want nothing more to do with it. They've seen the beheadings. They've been through all of that stuff. They just want some help. But some of them want to keep doing it, and they're not going to be doing it in Syria anymore. So just as the Mujahideen were created by the CIA in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden, all of his friends were trained in how to make car bombs, for example, by the CIA. As Adam Curtis, in The Power of Nightmares, explains with such horror, that so China is creating something in Xinjiang, so Putin created Chechnya. And this whole, the motives behind this and the consequences of this, we're in a lot of trouble. We need to demand honor. We need to demand integrity. We need to say, okay, think what the hell you like, but let's not have corruption. If we find that an organization has protected child molesters, then whoever did the protecting shouldn't be in the organization. We should at least name and shame all the police officers. We had a case here where a number of cities, 13-year-old girls were being recruited using alcohol by, in fact, largely men who came from Kashmir. I don't think there's any particular reason for that. They were Muslims from Kashmir. No reason to go out and harm them. But they recruited these girls into prostitution rings. And there was one case where a social worker had made, I think, 83 reports to the police and been ignored because she said these girls are coming for a lot of condoms. That was, she handed out free condoms. They're coming, there is something wrong here. And now, of course, those men have been sent to prison, which is where they thoroughly belong. But I want to know, how do we change our systems so that, I personally believe in double sentences. If you're a law enforcement agent and you're caught doing something, your sentence should be automatically doubled because your standard of ethics should be higher than anybody else's. What's more, your pay should be good enough to compensate for the dangers that you face on a daily basis, and the respect that the society has towards you should be very great because of the risks you take. But where we're hearing about policemen in the US raping women, taking them to the cells and raping them. We're seeing, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement. Because there is, a perception of, Trayvon Martin onwards. We're seeing white nationalism on the rise in the US. All of this cultic sort of hatred from one individual or one group to another, which will inevitably lead to carnage, which will inevitably lead to the devastation of our environment, where we actually have the potential now to sort out some of these people and, teach people to at least avoid them, which brings us back to Sam and the Unification Church of Saminanity.
Wait, that's going to help?
Yes, which will solve all the problems in the world. Just follow the first commandment, which is send me all your money.
Give me all your money.
Give me. Come on.
Give me. Right, yeah.
Yeah. No sending involved. Yeah. You just do it.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we'll have to wrap it up here. Yep. But I do encourage everyone to check out Jon and Sam's work. Their YouTube channel is called Opening Minds. We will link up to it. And yes, if you want to, start this process of healing, I encourage you to give all of your money to Sam. But Jon and Sam, I want to thank both of you for joining me this week. I'd love to have both of you back on in the very near future. Right. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I'll be talking to you all very soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.